Welcome to Countdown to Classic, a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday and Wednesday, but not this week, this is obviously a Thursday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and I am crazy about the vanilla days, the bygone era, or perhaps the prehistoric days of World of Warcraft. Now, as you all know, this show is a podcast all about you. Okay, maybe not you personally, just in case you started to sweat a little bit there, but it's about you, the players. You see, I'm in a bit of a conundrum. I'm not a go-to authority on World of Warcraft, but I know someone who is. You. Yes, you there, sitting around wondering as we speak whether or not ganking that lobby for a fifth time in a row would be considered excessive. It's the listeners and fans and forum posters who help to provide the content of this show. This show is about the players just as much as it is about this amazing game of World of Warcraft that we've all come to know and love. I'm just here as a fanboy of WoW and a mouthpiece for the news and conversations that we're all taking part in online. I try to stay as neutral as possible and present both sides of all the discussions presented in the show. But just before we get to the good stuff, I need to tell you that you can find all things Countdown to Classic online at countdowntoclassic.com. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever it is that you get your podcasts from, then please do hit that subscribe button and also like, follow, or subscribe to the show on social media. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Countdown to Classic. And we're also on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2. Countdown to Classic is a highly interactive show, so please do jump on those socials and contact me. And funnily enough, you'll more than likely hear back from me pretty damn quick. We love to hear your thoughts on World of Warcraft here, and why not have them broadcast around the world straight into thousands of earballs by submitting your memory lane or anger management related emails to me here at the show at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com or through the socials as I mentioned earlier. They do get read out. Give it a shot. Even if you just want to say hi and you might want to shout out at the end of the show, send it in and I very well will probably read it out. And now speaking of those shout outs, I'll have a few at the end of the show along with some show news in general, so please do stick around for that. Now, as this is a way back Wednesday episode and we engage in a very deep dive into the lore of World of Warcraft, I should remind you that this is merely a regurgitation of information that is readily available at the amazing WoW Wiki and Wowpedia websites. I've just spent a bunch of time amalgamating a bunch of different articles in order to produce a single flowing narrative for you. But now that I've covered all that, as some of you may know, this is the second part of a two-part episode covering all things Ahn'Qiraj. Last week, in episode number 10, we went through the lore and community reactions relating to the opening of the gates of Ahn'Qiraj. Please do go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already, as it will set you up well for today's episode, as we now finish this thrill ride through Silithid and the Fallen Kingdom by jumping into part 2 of the lore of what was actually inside Ahn'Qiraj after we opened those damn gates. Here we go with a scoop of vanilla. Ahn'Qiraj is the city kingdom of the Qiraji, found in the southern part of Silithid. Until recently, it was isolated from the outside by the sealed Scarab Wall. Once again, as we heard last week, Blizzard describes Ahn'Qiraj as Little is known of the ancient kingdom of Ahn'Qiraj, save for scattered legends concerning its creators. The enigmatic sorcerers known as the Qiraji. Night elf tales abound of the Qiraji's strange hold over the insect-like Silithid and their symbiotic link with the terrifying race. It has become clear that the Qiraji are stirring once again behind the sandblasted walls of their kingdom. The Silithid have begun to amass in the southern regions of Kalimdor. None know what vast evil might spew forth if the gates of Ahn'Qiraj were ever breached. So, we talked about the breaching of those gates last week. Now, in taking it from the top in this deepest of dives into the city kingdom of Ahn'Qiraj, we'll first have to answer a question you may already have arising from what we just heard. What's a Qiraji? In order to answer that, however, we have to go way, way, way back, almost to the very first instance of recorded Azerothian history. Well, at the very beginning of Azeroth's history, the land was ruled by the Old Gods. The Old Gods were chaotic, physical manifestations of the void. They are nightmares incarnate, mountains of blighted flesh and writhing tentacles that grow like cancers within the worlds of the Great Dark. Known to be among the most powerful beings that ever walked Azeroth, the Old Gods, one of whom was C'Thun, a name you're about to become very familiar with, live only to transform the worlds they infest into places of despair and death, serving the Void Lords. After the Old Gods embedded themselves in the surface of primordial Azeroth, they soon began spreading corruption around them, blighting and withering the land. The organic matter that seeped from their massive bodies gave rise to two distinct races, the Ahn'Qiraj and the Naraki, or Faceless Ones. The incredibly strong and resilient Ahn'Qiraj were employed as laborers by the cunning and intelligent Naraki, and were forced to build temple cities and towering citadels around their masters' massive bulks. The greatest of these holdings was built around the most powerful of the Old Gods, Qiraji, and this civilization soon spread across Azeroth, forming the Black Empire. For much of Azeroth's prehistory, the Old Gods ruled in tyranny, along with their elemental lieutenants. However, deep within Azeroth's core lies a world soul, a nascent sleeping titan that when awakened could be extremely powerful. The Titans, also known as the Makers, or the Travelers to the Trolls, or the Great Ones to the Oracles, are a race of extremely powerful, majestic creatures akin to gods. These metallic giants traveled across the cosmos, bringing order to worlds. I won't go too deep on the Old Gods and the Titans today, though, as they're going to get their own special dedicated episodes later down the track on Countdown to Classic. But back to it. The World Soul's echoing dreams reached out to the Titan Agramar, who then travelled with the rest of the Pantheon, which was the Titan High Council, to Azeroth. As the Titans made their way across the primordial landscape, they encountered a number of hostile elemental beings. These elementals vowed to drive the Titans back and keep their world inviolate from the invaders' metallic touch. The Pantheon, disturbed by the Old Gods' penchant for evil, waged war upon the elementals and their dark masters. Though the elementals were powerful beyond mortal comprehension, their combined forces couldn't stop the Titans. A battle between a Titan and C'Thun raged in Silithid. The Pantheon eventually shattered the Old Gods' citadels and chained the surviving three evil gods far beneath the surface of the world. C'Thun was imprisoned in a Titan research station for a super long time. Without the Old Gods' power to keep their raging spirits bound to the physical world, the elementals were banished to an abyssal plane where they would contend with one another for all eternity. Thereafter, the Titans and their Titan-forged, the armies crafted by the Pantheon from Azeroth's crust, turned their attention to the Ahn'Qir, many of which dwelled in enormous catacombs below the surface of the Empire. The Titan-forged Arcadus used his earth magic to collapse the burrows, forcing the insectoids to escape above ground, where they found themselves surrounded by the Titan-forged. Most of the Ahn'Qir were destroyed by the Titan-forged, though several small pockets survived by tunneling deep underground, too weakened to launch a counterattack. With the near extinction of the Ahn'Qir and the elementals' departure, nature calmed and the world settled into a peaceful harmony. Thousands of years later, long after the Black Empire's fall, a race known as the Trolls rose to prominence in Kalimdor and established great civilizations that covered most of the continent. One day, roughly 16,000 years before the First War, a rebellious group of trolls accidentally awakened Kithix, an ancient servant of the old god Yogg-Saron, who had survived an encounter with the Titan-forged Tyr centuries earlier. Kithix, knowing that destroying the trolls would please its old god masters, reached out with its mind and discovered the Ahn'Qir, rallying them into building the subterranean empire of Ahn'Qiraj. When the time was right, Kithix led the Ahn'Qir to the surface, launching a terrible war against the trolls. The Ahn'Qiri threat was unlike anything the trolls had ever faced before. When the insectoids had almost reached the sacred Zandalar Mountains, the Zandalar tribe united the trolls into the Empire of Zul to fight back against the legions of Ahn'Qiraj. Ambush tactics and the aid of the wild gods helped the trolls in pushing back the insectoids and even wounding Kithix, who retreated with a group of its closest followers to the northeastern corner of the continent. Knowing that the Ahn'Qir would soon move to attack outlying troll territories and would simply burrow underground and establish new colonies if allowed to live, the Zandalari sent the powerful Amani, Gurubashi, and Drakari tribes to track down and eliminate the insectoids, as well as establish new strongholds to guard the distant corners of the Troll Empire. The Drakari overthrew the northern Ahn'Qir, who had enslaved a group of Titan-forged Tol'vir, known as Obsidian Destroyers, while the Gurubashi succeeded in containing a group of Ahn'Qir in the Titan-forged prison complex that held C'Thun through a war of attrition. In the northeast, the Amani succeeded in tracking down and killing Kithix before establishing the city of Zulaman over its corpse. With Kithix dead, the trolls eventually managed to shatter Ahn'Qiraj. Having successfully eradicated all Ahn'Qiri presence from central Kalimdor and containing the insectoids in the far northern and southern reaches of the continent, the trolls proclaimed themselves victorious. 3 distinct groups of Ahn'Qir, however, managed to survive the destruction of their empire. The ones in the north congregated around the underground prison of the old god Yogg-Saron, evolving into the Nerubian race and establishing the kingdom of Azjol-Nerub, which we heard about in episode number 2 of Countdown to Classic, which was all about Naxxramas. Please do go back and listen to that one if you haven't yet. During the later stages of the war, the second group of Ahn'Qir fled to the southeast, drawn towards the lingering energies of the dead old god Isharj. These Ahn'Qir took up the name Mantid and founded the colony of Mantives. The third group of Ahn'Qir, and the one that we'll be paying attention to, fled to the southwest, where they ransacked and overthrew the Titan research station near Uldum, and enslaved the Tol'vir, a race of feline humanoids who were based there. Converting the research station into an extensive hive, they renamed themselves the Qiraji, and called their new home Ahn'Qiraj. The research station also held a darker secret. It had the secondary purpose of serving as the prison of C'Thun. The arrival of the Qiraji turned the station from a prison into a seat of power for a growing and evolving Qiraji society and culture. The Qiraji weren't alone in Ahn'Qiraj, as they co-inhabited the area with the insectoid Silithid. The Silithid's origin is slightly up for debate. Now, I read a few different things about the Silithid, and it seems that the lore was actually changed over time. Initially, it was thought that the Qiraji were born of the Silithid as a result of basically of C'Thun's doing. However, it actually has been somewhat retconned that the Silithid were either spawned from the Qiraji or they were kind of already there and they just got along and C'Thun basically controlled everyone and got them all to get along. That's a bit up for debate. It was a bit wishy-washy. I'm going with the Silithid were already there sort of in Ahn'Qiraj, and the Qiraji basically learned how to work with them. Let's go with that. If I'm wrong, guys, please do email me, feedback@countdowntoclassic.com, and say, hey, Josh, no, it's the other way around, or something like that, and I'll absolutely correct it on the show. Anyway, back to the story. To a humanoid's eyes, Silithid are enormous bugs, most of man-size or larger, with powerful natural weapons at their disposal. They don't seem to use tools, although they do build structures out of natural materials using their bodily secretions. Silithid are capable of communicating by touching antennae to one another. They can also send simple messages to larger groups by sending out chemical signals in the air. Individual Silithid possess a certain level of animal cunning, but are unintelligent. They exist to serve the hive and are specialized in their roles. Wasps attack, tunnelers dig, reavers defend, swarmers train, queens lay eggs, and so on. A Silithid instinctively gives its life for the colony. Silithid can range in size from a normal insect to gigantic. Size seems to depend on how long the Silithid are allowed to develop in their egg stage. It appears that size is also directly correlated with colony size. Most scholars agree that a Silithid begins life by hatching from an egg. At this point, the young Silithid is a broodling, a larval state as yet unspecialized for any role in the hive. Eventually, the broodling encases itself in a cocoon and changes into its new form, a wasp, reaver, swarmer, or possibly some other as yet unknown type of Silithid. While Silithids have not been a visible part of the world long enough for anyone to accurately gauge their lifespans, some researchers think that after achieving adulthood, a common Silithid can live for up to 5 years, although queens can survive for decades. Meanwhile, the Qiraji are sentient beings and developed a culture of their own. They share their progenitors' hatred of non-insectoid life and are completely hostile to other races. Except for the Silithid. They hold a particular dislike for the Titans, who, like other servants of the old gods, they consider usurpers and their servants. The Qiraji and their servants wield items made with the rarest and finest materials, bones from gargantuan ancient creatures, gems from the depths of the earth, metals pure and strong. The most powerful Qiraji wield items of such might they'd give pause even to a dragon. The rings worn by the Qiraji lieutenants are rumored to grant them formidable abilities. The corrupted gems that adorn them could, in theory, be swapped out with more pure materials to create uncorrupted versions of the rings. It seems that female Qiraji must constantly keep their faces covered. Different types of Qiraji are referred to as castes, and it seems to be that every caste has a leader who are under the command of the twin emperors, Veknalash and Veklor. The three most notable castes are the Battle Guards, led by Battle Guard Sartura, Gladiators, led by General Rajax, and Prophets, led by the Prophet Skiram. Each of the Silithid hives in Silithus has a crystalline prism in it. They are apparently a means for the Qiraji to communicate various messages and orders to the Silithid. Anyway, once the hive had been completed, the Qiraji remained mostly dormant for many, many, many years. One day, around 975 years before the First War, Archdruid Fandrail Steghelm, a leader of the Qiraji people and specifically its druids, decided it would be a great idea to initiate an ambitious quest to regrow the desolate land of Silithus. To this end, he sent his warrior son, Valstan, along with a group of druids to begin this project. As they trekked across the scalding dunes in search of freshwater reservoirs that they would use to transform the region into a lush forest, they came across a mysterious and ancient fortress deep in the desert's interior. Although some of the druids, sensing the darkness, advised against entering the dark halls, Valstan forged onward. His presence in the cold, shadowy halls of Ahn'Qiraj inadvertently roused the dormant Qiraji. From his prison beneath the fortress, the old god C'Thun became aware of the awakened Qiraji. As the Ahn'Qir from which they had evolved had worshipped and served the old gods, so the Qiraji chose to become the servants of C'Thun. Now, with an army amassed, and as in times past, C'Thun urged the insectoids into a murderous frenzy, forging a plan to exact revenge and retake Kalimdor. Those in the higher caste of Qiraji society began organizing their minions, the Silithid. Coming in many different forms and species, the Silithid were nonetheless totally loyal to the Qiraji above them. The ranks of the Qiraji also included numerous stone constructs, including the tenacious Anubisath. Horrified by their discovery, Valstan and his druids fled Ahn'Qiraj and established a small outpost in the desert to monitor the insectoids. Before their eyes, the fortress began to swell with greater and greater numbers of Qiraji. Having sent for reinforcements, Valstan and his companions could do little else but watch the build-up within the complex. And thus, the War of the Shifting Sands eventually commenced. Without warning, an army of innumerable proportions burst forth from the fortress itself, as well as the tunnels beneath Ahn'Qiraj. The Qiraji overlords directed their Silithid minions to engulf the desert, and then spread to all its neighbouring regions as well. They began to sweep across Silithus, swarming over every dune and canyon. By this time, however, Fandrail Steghelm had successfully rallied a sizable force of Kaldorei, consisting of druids, sentinels, priestesses of Elune, and keepers of the grove. He made haste to the south of the continent, where the night elf host clashed with their vicious foes. Having now broken out of Silithus, the Qiraji represented a major threat in the eyes of the Night Elves, who fought desperately to keep them contained within the south of the continent. While they had powerful forces at their disposal, they nonetheless found the sheer numbers of the Qiraji host to be insurmountable. Thus, a back-and-forth action ensued between the two forces. Occasionally, the Kaldorei would gain the upper hand and manage to force the Silithid and Qiraji back towards the dunes of Silithus, only for the insectoids to mount counterattacks with renewed strength and numbers and regain the initiative. The ebb and flow continued for months, and many hundreds fell on both sides. The land littered with dead night elves and insectoids alike. The War of the Shifting Sands was in full swing. In a determined effort to defeat the Qiraji, Fandral and the Night Elves established a number of outposts and bases across the south of Kalimdor, from which they could more effectively prosecute the war. These bases proved invaluable in allowing the Kaldorei to gradually but markedly push back the Qiraji and gain the upper hand. Eventually, the Night Elves advanced into Silithid and drove the Qiraji back into the very heart of the desert itself. Yet, just as final victory for the Night Elves seemed within reach, the war took a drastic and dire turn. Valstan had been ordered to hold and secure one of the Night Elves' outposts near the front, Southwind Village, which was important to their continued advance against the Silithid. During a feint orchestrated by the Qiraji, however, the village and those inside were surrounded. Valstan himself was captured and brutally ripped apart in two before his father's eyes by General Rajax. Valstan's death shattered the will and confidence of the Archdruid and sowed uncertainty and apprehension amongst the Night Elves' ranks. The Qiraji seized on this opportunity and lull in the fighting and swept once more through Silithid. The weary and confused Kaldorei forces subsequently fell back before this new onslaught. Having believed that they were on the verge of victory, this new turn of events severely dented the Night Elves' confidence and morale. Desperate after the war's recent events, Fandral contacted the reclusive Bronze Dragonflight who resided in the region. He begged them to aid the now failing war effort against the Qiraji, but the Bronze Dragons ultimately refused, declining to involve their flight in what they considered to be the affairs of lesser creatures. As the Silithid once more spread out from Silithid, however, they began to push into the deserts of eastern Tanaris. In their frenzy, they even assaulted the Caverns of Time, the sanctum of the Bronze Dragonflight. The Qiraji's reckless attack prompted the Bronze Dragons to finally join the war against them, allying with the Kaldorei and enlisting the aid of the red, green, and blue dragonflights as well. Led by Ahn'Qiraj, the Bronze Dragons, as well as those from the other flights, joined the fray and began to turn the tide against the Qiraji once more. The Night Elves, heartened by this new, if unexpected reinforcement, also began to increase their efforts to drive the Qiraji swarm back permanently. Unable to stand up to this new force, the Qiraji were continually forced back. The dragons proved particularly effective against the Qiraji, many of whom were unable to strike back at the dragons as they flew through the skies and decimated the Qiraji ranks. One instance where this proved untrue, however, was during one of the many ensuing battles in Silithid. During this conflict, a particularly cunning Anubisath named Osirian hurled his obsidian sword through the air to strike the bronze dragon Grakarond as he flew, catching him in the wing. Wounded, the worm fell, crushing many Qiraji as he did so. On the ground, Grakarond nearly mauled Osirian to death, but the remaining Qiraji now had a target on the ground to focus on, and they quickly converged upon and overwhelmed the dragon. The sight of his death subsequently came to be considered sacred by the Anubisath. Despite this instance, the Qiraji ordinarily proved badly equipped to deal with this new onslaught, and they eventually retreated to the very walls of Ahn'Qiraj. Soon, they were forced back inside its walls, where they lurked in its dark halls and their underground tunnels. Yet even with the aid of the dragons, the Qiraji could not be vanquished entirely. They were simply too numerous. Fandral feared that the war would never end and could not stand the thought that so many had given their lives, only for more to have to do so again and again in the future. Ultimately, he and the dragons devised a way to end the war immediately and decisively. They would lock the insectoid horde away inside Ahn'Qiraj itself. Now, obviously, we heard all about that last week with the gates of Ahn'Qiraj. Centuries later, however, the gates of Ahn'Qiraj were reopened. Rumours circulated amongst the army that had reopened the gates that C'Thun was present in a temple beyond the gates, with its great, horrifying, lidless eye, surrounded by a sea of tentacles, eager to vaporize every ignorant mortal daring to challenge its supreme power and right to the world of Azeroth. Hey, that was us! We did that! Well, now, that gets us up to date with the lore of basically arriving at Ahn'Qiraj. In order to get to C'Thun, we had to go through two instances, or raids. The first being the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj, a 20-man outdoor raid. And then there was the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj, a 40-man indoor raid. Who would we find in those raids? Well, here's a bit of a boss biography lesson. At the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj, or AQ20, we bumped into the following people or things. Qiraji, a large sand reaver, is the first boss found in the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj. Then we bumped into General Rajax, the primary militant commander of the Qiraji and the second boss of the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj. So who was General Rajax? Well, the mighty Qiraji, known as General Rajax, commands the Qiraji armies in battle. He was described in the War of the Shifting Sands as a towering monstrosity, swinging clawed limbs, looming over all, and always shouting commands to the insect soldiers of Qiraji and Silithid during battle. During the War of the Shifting Sands, Rajax clashed with Fandral and Valstan Steghelm, the leaders of the Night Elf forces, as we heard earlier. Later, he personally killed Valstan, as we heard, by brutally vivisecting him. Next, we came across Mome. Mome is an obsidian destroyer boss found in the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj. In preparation for their re-emergence in the world, the shadowy master of Ahn'Qiraj, C'Thun, commanded Emperor Veclor to create a new obsidian statue superior to all other destroyers. Veclor sought his twin brother's aid in the task, and while Vecnalash used his physical might to craft a grand body of volcanic rock, Veclor fortified the shell with powerful magic. Emperor Veclor named the finished construct Mome and observed as the Dark Master infused it with life. He was pleased and surprised to find that the improved Obsidian Destroyer was far more versatile than its earlier counterparts. The twin emperors intended to use Mome as a colossal weapon, knowing that its strengths would help it survive in the thick of melee as well as magical combat. But they did not expect for the construct's abilities to advance further without their own assistance. Far more surprising even to the arcane emperors was Mome's ability to summon burning elementals crafted of pure mana. It was only after Veclor witnessed this demonstration of Mome's unbridled power that the source of the construct's seemingly limitless energy was revealed. 3 tortured dragons, Arygos, Marithra, and Kalistraz, trapped alive within Ahn'Qiraj, but not granted the mercy of death as the emperors had believed. The twins were stunned to learn that their overseer had somehow bound the 3 dragons, then drained their inherent magical energy and corrupted it for his own use, fortifying not only Mome, but the rest of his twisted creations as well. Truly, it seemed as if there was no limit to the powers of the Ancient One. Next we bumped into Buru the Gorger, an optional Silithid boss in the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj. We then found Aemis the Hunter, a Silithid wasp-type boss. Next, There was, as previously mentioned, Osirian the Unscarred, who was a Horasath and the last boss of the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj. During the War of the Shifting Sands, as the Anubisath constructs crumbled under the Bronze Dragonflight's assault, a single Anubisath did the seemingly impossible. He found a way to fight back. Now, when Osirian took down the massive dragon Grakarond, the dragon actually mauled Osirian nearly to death. After the dragon was eventually killed by the Qiraji, Osirian's beaten body was dragged back to the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj following the battle, where he should by all rights have perished. It was whispered that Osirian found the favour of the malevolent force that reigns over the Qiraji, for in spite of his wounds, the construct survived. When the mighty Anubisath awoke, he found himself transformed, his strength bolstered, and his wounded head bound in the visage of a hawk. Emperor Vecnalash himself explained what had occurred. Where all others, including the Qiraji General Rajax, had failed to find a way to counterattack, the Anubisath had succeeded, for that he received a gift. Osirian's essence had been bound to several ancient crystals of distant origin, which would grant the Anubisath champion near invulnerability. There was a price for this boon, however. Osirian's life was maintained by the crystals, and if he should ever stray too far from them, the Anubisath would swiftly die. As others learned of Osirian's survival, the Anubisaths begin to refer to him as the Unscarred, revering him as a nearly invincible hero. The legends say that Vecnalash secretly entrusted Osirian with the responsibility of maintaining a watch on General Rajax to ensure that the commander would never fail again. Osirian serves the emperors to the best of his ability, despite the frustration of being eternally bound to a single location. The bones of Grakarond have become a sacred site to the Anubisaths, a testimony to their ability to defeat even the most powerful of enemies. Next, we move on to the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj, or AQ40. Who did we meet there? Well, firstly, we met the prophet Skerim, or Skerim, what have you. The prophet Skerim is an important religious leader in Ahn'Qiraj and author of the Prophecy of C'Thun. He's the first boss found in the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj and must be defeated for access to the rest of the zone. Next we have the three bugs, also known as the Trinity, the Triumvirate, the Triad, the Bug Family, and the Royal Trio. They are optional bosses in the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj and are composed of Lord Kree, Princess Yauj, I think, and Vem, and they all must be fought at the same time. Battle Guard Sartura is the apparent leader of the Qiraji Battle Guards and the second boss in the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj. That's if you haven't taken on the three bugs. Thancred the Unyielding, a Sand Reaver, is the big brother of Kuranax and the official third boss of the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj. Viscidus is another optional boss in the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj, a giant slime that can be accessed after the death of Thancred the Unyielding. Princess Huhuran is a large Silithid wasp and the fourth boss, again discounting optionals, of the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj. She requires very high amounts of nature resistance on all players. Next we have the clever brothers Veclaw and Vecnalash, who are also known as the Twin Emperors. They rule over the Qiraji from the sanctuary of their temple. Little is known about the Twin Emperors, except the fact that they created two powerful entities to serve as commanders of their armies. The ancient sandworm, Uro, is a being of legendary power. He is rumoured to have been created by the old god C'Thun himself as a mockery of life. He resides in the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj, obviously. His skin is unnaturally thick, nearly impregnable. It's flexible and allows him to move with the speed and grace of a much smaller creature. And finally, there's C'Thun, and we sort of know all about him by now. And that is the law of Ahn'Qiraj. Phew. We made it. Anyway, what did we, the players, have to say about Ahn'Qiraj? How about we find out in this week's edition of That's What We Said. Each lore episode, Countdown to Classic, turns to the forums for the players' thoughts on the content that we just covered. Now, the first post I bring you is from forum user Jamon, who says the following. In my opinion, Blizzard really needs another raid like AQ. Ahn'Qiraj was interesting, challenging, fun, and it's one raid I never got bored of. Ahn'Qiraj is and always has been a great experience for a raider to have, and kept every member of the raid thinking and strategizing the entire time. Now, the point that user is raising is basically this. Ahn'Qiraj was good fun. To them. Did you get to Ahn'Qiraj? Did you get to see this new high-end content when it was released? Wow, look, this is really hard to get to. I'm going to try and get there. Did you do that? Now, as with all content that Blizzard released, there were some supporters and there were some detractors. Did the challenge at the time engage you further with the game and push you to achieve success? Or did you think it was a little bit too hard and you just sort of returned to Molten Core or Blackwing Lair? Write to the show and let me know what you thought of AQ20 or AQ40 at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. Now, personally, I never saw it, so I have no idea. As you all know, if you've been listening to the show, I was not much of a raider, and I certainly got nowhere near Ahn'Qiraj, much to my dismay. This is something I hope to correct very much so when Classic comes out, as I will do what I can to take a mature approach to raiding and try to get to see all this stuff that I didn't get to see before and that I only get to see now on YouTube videos, some of which I just watched in preparation for this show. Of course, I've seen YouTube videos before about Ahn'Qiraj because I want to know what I missed out on. But I did sit back just a little bit before recording and watch some C'Thun guides on how to take him down. And I've got to say, it's just like, wow, I can't wait until I get nowhere near this all over again. It's still bizarre a little bit to me to have this endgame content that I just haven't seen outside of YouTube. But tell me if you're in the same boat as me, or if you're like, Josh, you're a freaking noob, man. I smashed all this stuff. Come on. We had like Nax on farm. AQ. Puh. Anyway, we'll move on to the next post. And this is from user Sana, who says this. Are you kidding? Ahn'Qiraj was a pestilential crater of suck. 40 even more so than 20. At least in 20, you could sneakily cast water walking on the whole raid just before they made the leap down to Buru. It was so horrible an experience that when I was back on Perinold and raiding in those days, the entire server laughingly referenced the Qiraji clap as an explanation for the mysteriously high number of I'm sick tonight raiders when it was AQ night on your guild's raiding schedule. I don't personally know a single person in-game who liked AQ. People who wanted gear from AQ, sure, but people who actually tolerated, let alone enjoyed AQ? Hell no. Oh, and the trash after Hoo-Hoo should have been considered a war crime. It's telling that more people showed up for gear up the new healer that joined Molten Core raids than would show up for Ahn'Qiraj. Now, that's an interesting point that user raises, and obviously, as I mentioned before, there's always going to be some detractors from certain pieces of content. And I did find in my adventures on the forums a little bit of hatred for AQ. And to be honest with you, I found it relatively split down the middle. Some people loved it. Some people thought it really wasn't great content. But the point here is that what they're saying is even with the gear rewards that you could get in Ahn'Qiraj, some players considered it such a long chore, such a joyless, difficult bore, that they wouldn't even attempt it, or they'd skip raid nights making up lame excuses like, oh, sorry, it's my grandma's birthday, or I've got man flu, or something like that. Did you ever do that? Or even better, what was your best excuse to get out of a raid night one night? Was it something like the need for nature resist gear, or the fact that some members of your guild hadn't put in the time to get the requisite amount of nature resist gear that drove you away from Ahn'Qiraj or turned you off from going near the joint? Write to the show and let me know. I've mentioned, obviously, the nature resist in this post, and again, please take this with a grain of salt because I wasn't there and I didn't have to do this stuff, but I was aware that nature resist was obviously part of Ahn'Qiraj, as people do talk about it quite a bit. Now, what I found online, and please again correct me if I'm wrong, was that generally you wanted physical DPS and caster DPS to aim for somewhere around 200 nature resist unbuffed, and for your healers to aim for somewhere around 100 nature resist unbuffed. Does that sound about right? But anyway, if your guild couldn't get to those figures and you were putting in the time to somehow get there, was it frustrating? Was Ahn'Qiraj somewhat of a guild killer? Or did it at the least slightly kill the mood within your guild on how you were tackling this content? The next post comes from a Reddit user, TRM90, who says the following. My guild almost cleared Ahn'Qiraj and we got C'Thun to like 10% and then Nax came out. But a few things stand out to me about the place. Firstly, it was the first raid to introduce enrage timers. This was big. Blackwing Leia had loads of battles of attrition, but AQ40 bosses for the first time gave DPS real responsibilities. Secondly, it was the first raid to introduce optional bosses. Thirdly, it had very difficult trash. Fourthly, is that a word? It had an optional council fight where you could kill the 3 bugs in different orders. And finally, it was honestly a brilliant raid for its time. It had an incredible atmosphere, and it's a proper dungeon crawl, and the difficulty curve was perfect. A few points raised there from that user. AQ40 was obviously added to the game and gave us a few mechanics that would eventually become part and parcel of the World of Warcraft experience. Things that they mentioned: enrage timers, optional bosses, hard trash mobs. And I've seen this come up a lot. Just the shout-outs to the annoyingly difficult trash mobs that littered AQ40, to the point that people were dying to skip them despite, the minor chance of loot. More on that later. As this poster said, at least in AQ20, there was a chance at one point to skip some of the trash. How do you feel about the difficulty of the trash mobs in general in Ahn'Qiraj? Were you for them or against them? And when I say that, do I mean, did you enjoy the slightly raised difficulty level of trash mobs, or did it piss you off? Now, obviously one of the benefits of having a bit more difficulty involved in the trash is that it might keep people a bit more on the ball and not switching on to autopilot mode, or even at worst going AFK during some pulls. Or do you perhaps prefer that? Do you prefer being able to switch off your mind a little bit and not really be burning calories for hours on end during a raid? Which is your preferred method of going through 3, 4, 5, 6 hours worth of content? The next point comes from Reddit user Only Rogue, who says this. AQ20 was kind of cool in a we've got a few spare hours, let's raid something way. Same as old Zul'Gurub. AQ40 though? That was a nightmare. I never got to C'Thun, only up to Uro. Still, it was a rather miserable experience compared to the excellent Blackwing Leia and the awe-inspiring Molten Core. one more post from another user, Serastar. As a smaller guild, AQ20 was a godsend. The fights were interesting, the books you would get for better spells were exciting, and I felt the whole area was a new bad guy which was welcomed. I was getting a little tired of the Legion, to be honest. The server-wide goals were fun also with the world events. Now, the point that those two users are raising are sort of more about, hey, yeah, AQ40, all that jazz, that was great. Don't forget AQ20. You might have been bummed out by AQ40, but AQ20 was kind of cute. There was something in there for the little guy or the little guild. They had that Zul'Gurub type feel in that it didn't feel like a long, drawn-out raid. It felt quick, and they enjoyed that kind of pick-up raid feel to it for when you didn't have 4 to 5 to 6 hours to really knuckle down and get through a boatload of content. However, how did it compare to other content? Did you prefer Blackwing Lair? Did you prefer Molten Core? Or was AQ actually the bee's knees for you? Again, write to the show and let me know who you got. Feedback at countdowntoclassic.com. The next post comes from Reddit user Genny Jin, who says this. The road to C'Thun was pretty grueling after the first 3 or 4 bosses. Twin Emperors was a nasty encounter, and the trash afterwards was almost an encounter in itself. Visitus, an optional boss earlier in the instance, was just as hard and just shy of impossible for Alliance players. Visitus's main damage-dealing mechanic was a stacking poison dot that he would AoE on the raid very quickly. And without the poison cleansing shaman totem, it was very difficult to keep under control. Not to mention that shaman brought frost shock and could contribute more to freezing the boss with the wind fury buff. It was probably the only time paladins weren't flat out better for raiding. The Uro and C'Thun nerfs basically amounted to HP changes. It was much easier to stun C'Thun, and once he was stunned, it only took a few cycles to kill him. Most guilds killed him in one night after the nerf, because while everyone had the mechanics down, it just wasn't feasible to keep the fight going through the 10 or more stun cycles originally required. It made it a little anticlimactic because before that, the race for server first was really hot, and C'Thun killed all that momentum. Being the first on the server to get the I phase down didn't feel like a real achievement. I remember AQ40 fondly as one of the coolest raids Blizzard did in terms of new lore and the effect that the event had on the world, but the impossible end bosses soured the whole ordeal, and the crappy minor upgrade/side grade loot model really made it frustrating rewards-wise. Naxxramas was the real crown jewel of vanilla, and it's a terrible shame so few people got to see it before it was turned into a face roll for Wrath. Vanilla was a crazy time when Blizzard still hadn't hashed out how to give everyone what they wanted, so they made impossible bosses, made all hybrids healers, and let Alliance and Horde raids have huge power disparities on encounters. C'Thun being so hard didn't even seem out of place. It sucked, and that was the game sometimes. Really, really amazing posts there, and a few points that have been raised. And the first one I want to tackle is, do you agree with the Horde versus Alliance bias that may have been in the game at this particular specific encounter in Ahn'Qiraj? Now, I thought the Alliance bias was how things were done at Blizzard. Apparently not, if a shaman made a world of difference during this encounter in AQ. Out of control difficulty didn't really make for a fun time for this person. If the light at the end of the tunnel is so faint and your guild name doesn't start with an N and end with an Ihilum, then you are basically fucked for the last few bosses of this content. And then, even if you got them down, the rewards didn't necessarily scale with the risk. is that true? I mean, I thought I'd always heard that AQ loot was actually pretty sweet. Now, I'm not disputing that Nax loot was the real drool-worthy treasure chest of vanilla. That much is obvious. But was AQ loot back in the day considered a side grade, or at best, a very, very minor upgrade? Please, again, write to the show and let me know. But I do really enjoy the points raised by that user, and particularly in regards to the difficulty of the bosses kind of being a bit of a buzzkill, particularly for progression guilds. We were used to seeing the news come out. So-and-so guild takes down world first for this boss. And as I said, it was usually Neolum or Niolum, however you pronounce it. And there were other top guilds like Elitist Jerks and Death and Taxes and guilds of that nature. But it kind of pumped the brakes when, as they say, all we were getting reports of was, yeah, they took down the first phase and it stayed there for 6 weeks. It just did change things a little bit in terms of progression. Did it bum you out, or were you glad that these gun guilds actually had a fucking real right challenge put in front of them for once? And a challenge that was actually, funnily enough, insurmountable, as we're about to find out in Tidbits. But we'll get to that soon. Moving on to the final post of That's What We Said for the week. And we turn to back to the official forums with user Zothic, who says this. Look, Old God raids in general have the coolest feeling around them. Whilst AQ40 wasn't exactly perfect, you can't say you didn't feel a certain sense of awesome when you saw C'Thun in that chamber or floating above the twins. Old You Are is another example of this. Blizzard knows that we expect some serious shit from Old God raids. Just wait for N'Zoth and pray to God it isn't underwater. Now, the point that user raises is obviously focusing on new lore and old gods. As mentioned in the post just prior to this one, we did get new lore with Ahn'Qiraj. The story of the Qiraji was one that we hadn't been told before, and it was all kind of new and cool. Or at least I hope it was, considering I just read it out to you for the last 45 minutes. But then, also, to have revolved around such a core figure, and a core figure in the history of Azeroth, the old gods, and to actually see one of them in all their monstrous glory. There it is. It's right in front of you, and then you're fighting it. 40 little old player characters taking on a freaking old god for the first time. One of the most powerful beings that had ever been seen on Azeroth. That's like seeing Mr. T in a bar and then getting in a fist fight with him. Did it just have that cool factor that Blizz is so capable of giving us? Or did that lore not really work for you? Are you not really a lore person? You didn't give a shit about old gods, new gods, fucking who gives a shit? Maybe you don't. Some of us think it's pretty cool, clearly by that post. As I say, write to the show and let me know. But with all that being said, now it's time for anger management. Each episode, Countdown to Classic brings you some of the angriest posts that I've dug up in the forums regarding the content that we just covered. And the first post comes from the official forums with user Lena, who says this. I hated AQ. Bugs and insects. Oh my, no. The next post comes from user Monarchos, who says this. Except for Skerim, Emps, and C'Thun, the bosses were lame, and the trash was horrible. Go away, Qiraji. Next, we have Reddit user. I do apologise for this user's name. I'll still say it, because we're all somewhat mature here, but if you're faint of heart, or, a bit of a pardon my French moment, maybe do the old earmuffs for a second. From Reddit user, shut up and suck my clit. The memories of flying for 10 minutes to Silithid from Darnassus, Farming endlessly for Twilight documents, robe sets, and medallions still haunt me. Never mind AQ40 itself with his 15-minute walks after a failed boss attempt. Next we go to user Cartheus, who says this. AQ was terrible. Nature resists, spam, hurry, get more, get more, get more. 40-mans were awful, by the way, as well. Loot drama and only 2 to 3 big guilds per server progressing equals the suck. Next we turn to user Tiberum, who says this. C'Thun was literally unbeatable at first. Mathematically could not be done, even if the fight wasn't buggy as hell, which it was. Trash before Twin Emps broke more guilds than Valistraz. Battleguard Sartura killed people in the raid group so quickly that virtually the only viable way of downing her was to have everyone release and run back into the raid while the fight was still progressing, which eventually led Blizzard to add in the can't enter raid while encounter is in progress notice. Princess Huhuran would destroy the entire raid in seconds if you didn't have a full set of nature resist gear, but crumpled like tissue paper when you did. Uro was interesting. Next, Reddit user Northern Encephirum says this. I was a priest healer pre-nerf. It was no fun pre or post-nerf. That fucking trash still gives me nightmares. I remember our paladin class leader screaming in vent. Okay, fuckers, first you're all flying down to South California. Second, we're all going to stand in a giant circle in a parking lot. Third, I'm going to hold a flashlight, turn it on, and slowly turn clockwise with it. If the light touches any of you, I'm going to shank you with a knife. Very fairly summed up. But with all that anger out of the way about Ahn'Qiraj, now it's time for Tidbits. Each lore episode, Countdown to Classic, comes to you with a few little-known pieces of information, or perhaps you did know them and you can say, haha, Josh, I'm well ahead of you. Of course I knew that. But here's a few fun facts or bits of trivia about the content that we've just heard about. Firstly, I'll start with this. Did you know that one of the people who posted about C'Thun being unbeatable and drawing Blizzard's attention to it was Ian Hazacostas, who is now obviously the director of World of Warcraft. So way back when, before he got hired by Blizzard, Ian Hazacostas was the guild manager of the guild Elitist Jerks, which was one of the finest guilds in the land back in the vanilla days, along with guilds like Death and Taxes, Afterlife, Ascent, Immortality, things like that, and Nihilum, as I said. Now, what actually happened was, C'Thun was causing a lot of grief. People were taking a really long time to down this boss, and people started scratching their heads as to why the top guilds hadn't defeated this boss yet. And particularly, the top guilds were scratching their own heads going, yeah, why the fuck haven't we taken this guy down yet? What's going on here? So, in an unprecedented move, members of all, well not all, but a few very well-known top guilds, such as I said, Elitist Jerks, Death and Taxes, Afterlife, Ascent, Immortality, etc., began to publicly discuss together C'Thun strategies after about 1.5 months of futile attempts on C'Thun. Now, I found the now relatively famous post from Hazacostas about C'Thun. Now, he posted under his old character's name, Gurgthok, and I'm going to read that post out to you because this is essentially what kind of got Hazacostas hired. Well, that coupled up with many other things, but this guy now runs the game, so interesting to hear. Listen to this. Dare's post above basically nails it completely. I don't agree that Phase 1 needs to be toned down, honestly. On our better days, we'd consistently get to Phase 2 in about 6 minutes, with 38 to 39 people alive. 40 if we wanted to use battle reses, and with good mana. It's fine. In theory, there are unfair and unlucky ways to die in Phase 1. In practice, those unlucky things seem to happen to some people a whole lot more than others, and never happen at all still to others. Anyway, Phase 2. Basically, I don't think many people really care much about trade secrets anymore. I just want to see C'Thun killed, and I don't really care remotely as much as I once did if we're the first to do it. Some further insight into C'Thun Phase 2. Every 30 seconds, 8 small eye tentacles pop up, spread throughout the room. They immediately begin mind-flaying a random target in the room for 750 per second, unresistible. Each has 2300 HP. If all 8 don't die within a couple of seconds of spawning, people are taking some serious damage. On 2 separate 40-second timers, C'Thun summons 2 types of giant tentacles. He randomly targets players and summons the tentacles under them. Anyone with a spawn beneath them or near that spawn takes 3k to 4k damage and goes flying across the room. Both types of tentacles melee for 1.5k on a T2 geared tank. They hurt. Giant claws thrash and will one-shot anyone who is not a tank. If untanked, they will burrow and re-emerge beneath healers, doing that fun 3 to 4k damage and knockback effect. This means a dead healer. The other type of tentacle is a giant eye, which repeatedly uses the same eye beam attack that the Eye of C'Thun uses in Phase 1. The claws have about 90,000 HP, and the eyes have about 40,000 HP. There is no cap on the number of giant tentacles that can be alive at once. We've seen 5 claws and 2 eyes at the same time, which is fun, let me tell you. Throughout this all, every 10 seconds, C'Thun eats a player, teleporting them into his stomach, where they have other hazards to deal with. Basically, over the course of every 60-second period, the encounter requires your raid to do roughly 230,000 damage in order to keep up with the various spawns. Now, a 40-man raid can certainly accomplish that on a single target. But when some people are in C'Thun's stomach, and the targets of that DPS are spread throughout the room, and when clustering at all, that is, to melee burn down a specific tentacle, means that you get destroyed by a spawning tentacle or a jumping eye beam. The end result is simply impossible. I would love for someone to prove me wrong. And he also goes on to say a bit later, this has been tried. Basically anything you might think of, it's been tried. After a couple of weeks of beating our heads against Phase 2 head on, we came to the conclusion that there had to be some gimmick, because the fight was impossible otherwise. We tried basically everything, and if we didn't, I can guarantee you that one of the hundreds of other creative tacticians working on this fight across multiple continents did. So that was Hazzikostas' take on C'Thun and what ultimately got him a bit of attention with Blizzard and eventually wind up having a nice little World of Warcraft career for him. But he was quite the theory crafter and proved basically that C'Thun was mathematically impossible to kill and sent that information on to Blizzard. So C'Thun was eventually nerfed, and then he was taken down by the guild's Neelim soon after. There was a rumour that Neelim actually killed him the night before the nerf by flasking the entire raid, which was a totally new concept back then. However, that was just a rumour, and it was confirmed only hours after Blizzard made the changes by way of a nerf to the C'Thun encounter that they had indeed managed to kill him. So, that was quite the moment. And that leads into the next tidbit, because as much as we just talked about how much grief C'Thun gave players back in the day, funnily enough, C'Thun wasn't actually the last unkilled boss in the raid. Out of all the bosses encountered in the vanilla days of World of Warcraft, C'Thun took 86 days from release to be killed, putting the old god at number 2 on the list of bosses to hold out the longest before being taken down by players. Who was number 1, you might ask? It was Uro. in Ahn'Qiraj, who was virtually just as unkillable as C'Thun was. Now, Uro lasted 87 days from the Twin Emperor's death, I should say. Then they went down on the 26th of April 2006, with C'Thun being taken down on the 25th of April 2006. So, interesting that the optional boss, Uro, lasted a little bit longer. Uro got the same nerf that C'Thun did, in that Blizz changed things up. They had its Quake ability deal significantly less damage to players, and thus that's what helped that boss basically get taken down. Now, the final tidbit of the week is this one. Did you hear the story about the World of Warcraft guild that was banned as a result of their activities in Ahn'Qiraj? I'll summarize the news as much as I can, but it basically goes like this. The World of Warcraft guild Overrated was permanently banned by Blizzard after it was caught cheating within the game. How were they cheating, do you ask? Well, they used a little exploit that they discovered that basically revolved around knocking down walls, apparently. What they did was they found a way to, well, whether you call it cheating or not, but avoid the C'Thun trash, or the trash leading up to that boss, who dropped not such amazing loot, and they basically bypassed some of the trash on the way to C'Thun by this exploit of, as I say, knocking down walls, whatever that might mean. Now, one of the members of the guild was quoted, and they said this: "Let me explain. We're the only US Horde guild that clears Nax. It's been like that for a few weeks. People found that the pre-C'Thun trash was so painful that they decided to install some stupid thing that deletes walls or something, and you can just run there after Scarum. I know we had it coming, blah blah, whatever. We know we deserve it. I'm sure they'll try and get it rescinded, because it's kind of a steep punishment with no recourse whatsoever." Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. There was a permanent ban of a guild due to their little tweaking with the game. So there you go. You might have known that one. You might have known all those tidbits that I just read out. If you didn't, I hope you learned something. But that's been the show for this week. And as we wrap up, I just want to give a few shout outs to some people. Now, the first shout out is to a listener who emailed me a couple of days ago named Kia, who said the following in response to an email that I read in the last episode about my reference to Sylvanas as being saucy, in response to a listener email who said, please stop calling Sylvanas saucy and show her a bit of respect. And I said, absolutely, I'd be more than happy to show the due respect from this point forth. Now, however, these aren't my words. This is from a user, Kia, a listener, Kia. Counterpoint to the email you read about Sylvanas. If we can't call Sylvanas saucy, then we'll just have to come up with another similar word to replace it. It's no secret that Warcraft's art style features very muscly men. You could even say beefy. Tauren jokes aside, if the men are beefy, then the women could be described as gravy. That's right, that makes the people of the World of Warcraft a hearty beef stew. Disregard the fact that gravy is a sauce, leaving Sylvanas still technically saucy. Now, I just thought that was a bit of fun. I thought it was amazing that firstly, I had a listener write into me and want to correct me, and rightfully so, on how I referred to certain characters of the lore, and then to have another listener write in as a tongue-in-cheek counterpoint to that listener's email. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. It means this much. You're all listening to the end, I hope, because I'm actually getting a lot of you contact me, quoting the show back to me from very much the deep end phases of the show. And I just want to say thank you so much to every single one of you for listening to every word of all these episodes. At least it tells me that there is some form of interesting content coming your way, and you are happy to receive it. But following on with the shout outs, I also want to shout out listener Dustin, who emailed me this week and said that they were a raider who was a member of the #1 guild on Nostalria, supposedly, and they are very, very well versed in Nax raiding and all of that jazz, and they may want to call into the show and have a chat with me so that you guys can hear it. I've told them that I'm more than happy to do that. Hopefully we'll be recording something this weekend. We'll see how we go. And on top of that, just a reminder that I do hope, again, I've rescheduled with Super Soaker, and we hope to be speaking this weekend. I'm hoping to bring you guys more interviews, and they're not going to be your stock standard interviews that you're so used to seeing on YouTube and things of that nature, which are really, there's a lot of very dry one-on-one interviews with people about the game. Knowing me, knowing the content of this show, I hope you would have the faith in me that I'm going to try to jazz it up as much as I can, make it fun, make it interesting, make it something that you want to sit through the entirety of. And to all of you listening, basically, I would say this. If you have a particular set of skills, or if you have an area of the game that you are incredibly well versed in to the point that you feel like quite the expert, write to me and let me know, and I'm happy to touch base with you and see how we go about calling into the show. As I said, I want to get more of you involved in the show, and I want to actually air episodes where you all call into the show and we have a chat. Whether that's a 30-second chat, a 5-minute chat, or an hour-long chat. We'll see how we go. But this is a user interactive show. It's about you, the listeners. So hit me up with an email and tell me what you think your credentials are that would get you on the show and deserve to be heard by the thousands of listeners we've now got worldwide. On that note, I also want to spend 2 last final great shout-outs to Althador and Dunedane, who recently joined the Countdown to Classic Discord channel, which, again, I can't say enough good things about everyone. If you'd like to chat with a great group of people, please do find the link on the website and join the Discord channel. It's an amazing group of people. But these two listeners, Althador and Dunedane, both direct messaged me this week, and they both said, hey, Countdown to Classic, love the show. You have made us want to create our own content. We have now done that. After I exchanged a few messages with them, I gave them some positive vibes and said, guys, just do what I did. Just hold your nose and dive in. Don't plan it too much. Just start doing it. It's the best way to do it. And both of them got back to me and said, fuck, we did. We just did it. One created a website. One created a YouTube video. Althador with his website and Dunedane with his YouTube video about getting into Old Ironforge. Both of these you can find on the WoW Classic Reddit page. And I was really happy to hear that. And basically I gave them, some kudos and they're great guys. That's amazing. And it was a bit, made me think, because I only started this 5 weeks ago, and it's a bit of a circle of life situation, because it was only 5 weeks ago when I was messaging Tip and saying, hey Tip, I love your videos. You have inspired me to create some content of my own, being this podcast. Now, I do understand somewhat the irony that some of you might be laughing, going, well, it's funny that you messaged Tip and then 5 weeks later you're doing an hour-long podcast, essentially really highly scrutinizing some of the content that he's released recently. But as I said, it didn't come from a position of animosity. I very much still enjoy Tip's work. But yes, I messaged Tip and Tip sent me some messages of positivity saying, hey man, do it, go for it. It's all good. And that really helped me. And so I'm happy to kind of, pass on the love and see how we go. And all of you, I can't say this enough. If you're thinking of doing it, just dive in the deep end and do it. Now, the final shout out goes to a few Discord users who as I mentioned, the Discord channel is fantastic. Hexamus, Valerie's Gun, Seven Winters, North Bear, Aim High Swee. I just want to say a special thank you. Thank you to everyone on the Discord channel, but especially to those people who are really being super chatty and helping build up this channel into something really, really comfortable to be a part of. And I just want to say thank you guys for getting involved and getting amongst it, and I can't thank you enough. But that's enough for this week, or for this episode of Countdown to Classic. Can't wait to see you next week, everyone. Hope to come to you soon with some of those interviews we mentioned. Have a great weekend. See you later. Bye.